startup strategies to start up local conversations?
We have a number of resources for folks who are starting up local conversations, where we have compiled these in the forms of interviews, locomotive conversations. So definitely there are ways of going deeper on this. One of the things that I recommend to folks when they're first getting a local conversation is actually just get to know one another. You're probably not always, but it's likely that you're going to start with a relatively like small group, which is actually awesome because then you get a chance to get to know one another, find out like what kind of experiences people are bringing to the table. What are their backgrounds? What are they passionate about? Find out like what are the issues that exist in your group that people are passionate about and record those somewhere so that as you begin to kind of move down your journey together, as you're thinking about where to take action as a group, it's best to take action when possible around issues that the group is already passionate about, maybe even already has some experience with. I think that's a big part of it. Just get to know one another. I think, Norm, you said this maybe last week or the week before. There's a reason why we call these local conversations. This really is an ongoing conversation, hopefully a years long conversation that's happening in your community about how your community can become stronger and more resilient. So just begin with a conversation, I would say. Some other recommendations that we've seen or that we have experience with personally, maybe start with some education as well. Go through, let's say, the Strong Towns book or the Strong Towns 101 course, the Not Just Bikes videos. This can be helpful because you're getting everybody on the same page with Strong Towns ideas, with Strong Towns terminology. And so that can be really helpful. Let's see, Kerry Westerbeck in Bothell, he started with the curbside chat videos, which are now a few years old, but they're actually still awesome. They are fantastic. They're typically quite a bit shorter, even than the Not Just Bikes videos, sub 6 minutes. But they introduce these core Strong Towns ideas. So you can watch a video like this together. Another recommendation from Carrie, from Jordan in Sioux Falls, others, have food. Make food and drink available if it's at your home or at a coffee shop or a pub or something. That can help grease the wheels. And then another recommendation is just to keep it fun. Can kind of keep it lighthearted. Don't try to jump into action too quickly, like unless your circumstances warrant it. Just like let this grow and like you develop these relationships. There's somebody put in the local conversation Discord today that I think it was today, a picture it was from Grand Rapids, Michigan. They had a couple folks for their first local conversation meeting. I think just 2, which is awesome. Like that is enough. We consider a local conversation to be up and running when 2 people have gotten together to talk about the Strong Towns approach and how it relates to their community. But they went from 2 in the first meeting to 11 in the most recent meeting. It is an awesome photo. We get photos like this all the time. It's really cool. So those are just, I'm trying to keep it kind of like low barrier, low bar, fun. So that would be my recommendation. Just start with a regular conversation and have some fun with it. And what would you recommend, Norm or others? We have a lot of local conversation leaders here today.
Yeah. Well, I'm prompted by the question that Chris has asked in terms of having engineers or other smart people involved with the local conversation. And one of the things to do is to invite them. And what I have found a little bit of success with is just saying, hey, we're having a meeting. Can you present to our group on X or Y? And some will view it as a personal opportunity just to do something that they're passionate about. For others, it can be a professional opportunity. And so we had a young college student who was in an urban planning program. And I said, Max, can you do an analysis of our housing action plan and actually present your material? That was still a really beneficial thing. We had a nearby us, we have a group called Small Housing BC that's working towards accessory dwelling unit legalization and things like that. I said, hey, could you present to us? And so they took note of us. They began to be aware that there's a group in Delta that's doing exciting things. And it was somewhat complimentary to them that they were being asked to participate. And so I think that has been really helpful. We have an architect that I've asked to share his guidance or insights into those types of things, and to do so without the imposition on them that they join the group or they become a charter member, but instead say, hey, we're going to learn from you. We're going to pick up from you, even if it's somewhat, contrary to your own views. That's actually a good opportunity for the group to kind of start to figure it out, because there's no sense in which like there is a party line that we are insisting that every group walks, and there can never be any, divergence from that. In fact, it's the exact opposite. The whole idea of the local program is how do we help and stimulate that chaotic, kind of messy, kind of out there sort of group energy that exists in all of these local contexts, and really help with other places.
Kind of just show up. And by that, I mean, like I had interaction with the checkout lady at the grocery store the other day, and she remembered me from the 2 or 3 trips before when I come in my bike helmet and my high vis vest and a full cart of groceries. And oh my God, how are you going to get all those things on your bike? Oh, it's not that hard. Do it all the time. And my mom lives over here, and she remembered me from previous trips. Making contacts like that all about town, that there's a better way and a different way, that hopefully that set enough of those seeds sprinkled around, who knows what they might grow into someday. But just show up, I guess, is about all I got at this point. Or all I know to do so far is to just show up.
That's really good, Danny. And related to that is something else that we have heard from Jordan Deffenbaugh and other local conversation leaders, and that's to be consistent. And so Jordan tells the story in Sioux Falls, where I think the first maybe five times, like they kind of advertised that they were going to start this local conversation, and I think maybe the first 5 times it was just him and his co-organizer who were showing up at this brewery, and then one time like his co-leader couldn't make it, and so it was just Jordan kind of sitting there all alone. But they kept showing up time after time. People knew where to find them, and then now they are like they're just rocking and rolling. And we published an article just this week about a $100,000 grant that their group just got to do some work in Sioux Falls. And so he talks a lot about just, be consistent. People should know where to find you.
Yeah, I was going to say that I think it's actually to your advantage to start small, to develop a group culture before you really grow it. I think you can really privilege the groups that, like, our first meeting and we had 50 people as a success, but actually like you have 50 competing interests. It's really hard to develop a culture. And so in ours, we started with just three of us consistently. And there's, 1 or 2 others that kind of are in and out. And I did have one where it was just me sitting there, but that was good too. I got some stuff done. But I think starting small is actually an advantage to just creating a culture, so that when you are ready to grow and when you do grow the group, you already have something kind of like an agreed upon culture or group tone that you've set, which is easier to do with just 3 people, especially if that your small group is kind of in agreement on some basic things. So
Eric Noonan, welcome. He said, do you have any strategies to get media to accurately cover city government decisions with a strong town's understanding? In terms of the strategy, so one element of it is, and this is tied into something that we're working on right now, is to do some of that work yourself if you are able to. And so that takes the form of writing a local blog, or doing some analysis on Twitter, or providing a brief YouTube channel where you just say, hey, the council is considering this. Here's a handful of factors to consider for those that are making that type of a decision. And I know that it can feel, it's sort of a slow but steady build up until all of a sudden it becomes more significant. So my brother-in-law, to me, is an inspiration because he's in Winnipeg, Manitoba, and he just started writing what he calls love letters to his city. And his blog is dearwinnipeg.com. And what he does there is, it began very simply just saying, I think that my city is on the wrong track. And so he started, I think, 4 years ago, and nobody was reading it, and that was fine. He wasn't writing it for everyone. He was just mainly writing it for himself. People began to take notice of it. And it was interesting because the main Winnipeg Free Press, as well as the radio stations, were not paying attention to it. Yeah, of course they wouldn't, because it was just some small little thing. But as Mitch continued to write, city planners and city staff and others began to take notice, because they were like, oh, somebody is talking about something that I care about. And that is something that your local paper or local media won't often cover, the things that you wish that they would cover. I remember being a kid on a sports team, and the one day that we got like a little write-up about ourselves, it was like, oh, this is amazing. But when it comes to municipal stuff, there's a lot of things where the idea of walkability or things that you care about so rarely makes it into the paper, or if it does, it's done in a really skewed way. So as Mitch began writing about like budget deficits, he said, our city, the paper says we have a balanced budget this year. This is fantastic. We're doing great as a city. And he's like, yeah, but we're financially insolvent. We can't pay our bills. We have, major problems. So don't buy the smoke and mirrors that we're getting, that our city is in a great position and all this growth is paying off. And so as he began to continue to write these pieces, borrowing liberally from Strongtown's concepts, what began to happen is that he began to develop some credibility, and over time was given an opportunity to write an editorial for the local paper, kind of took on different things, such that the prior 4 years prior, when he first started, it was because the election was happening and the coverage was terrible. This go round, the election coverage, a front page article was quoting Daniel Herricus from Strongtowns, as well as my brother-in-law Mitch, about like the structural insolvency of the city and whether any of the candidates were going to do anything about it. That the whole narrative of the media attention has shifted. It isn't that he had some advanced degree in urban economics. It was just partly for him was setting up a point of doing that on trying to get an article out at least once a month. And that began to just take hold. That actually happened with me as well, where I started just writing fairly junky articles, but people began paying attention and tracking it, in part because there's a vacuum and you can start to fill that. And so we're hoping at the national gathering to launch what we're calling the local creator program. And much like the local conversation program is helping groups to form, the idea is we can also help local creators to write about, or TikTok, or do podcasts, or whatever it looks like, sand art, whatever you need to do in order to be able to spread the message, providing analysis, sparking conversations, sparking discussions at the local level. And so getting the media to accurately cover city government decisions it's going to take a while. It often takes a bit of nudging or proposing a different level of analysis as an alternative, until that alternative becomes unignorable. And that's part of why we're passionate that like local conversations are really going to make a difference. But I'm also convinced that local creators, somebody that just starts up a podcast and is like, what's on the council agenda this week? And just takes that question and makes it palatable to a new audience, that can really have an impact. The trouble is like you're dealing with like 5 people reading your blog, or like, your own mother-in-law being like, yeah, I'm not interested. That can happen, but it's still really valuable to do it. And over time, it starts to build up opportunities. As Chris says, it's an interpretive dance as we try to engage with our community.
I'm curious, can you describe the neighborhood walks that your local conversation does in Delta?
Yeah, so we call them mini pops. Because our group is called Del Pop, Deltons for People-Oriented Places. And so then just for fun, we call them mini pops is whenever we do like an outing or an adventure or a meetup at a local coffee shop, whatever that looks like. And outside of our regular monthly meetings. And what we've done a handful of times now is just said, let's meet at such and such a place. And we're basically just going to commit to 30 minutes, 45 minutes of walking around the community. Typically, it stretches to like an hour and a half as we do it. And ideally, it's with someone that has some insight or some understanding of the place. So we had Jeremy, who's an architect in our community. He helped with one of the walks where he was just pointing out, like, often when we walk, we look for the significant things. And maybe if you pull up, John, the article that Grayson Johnson wrote in praise of background buildings, he was able to really highlight, like, look at the way that the urban fabric works. And you'll see, one, the great opportunities that we have to run, new path connections, the ways that the older built form of the more traditional neighborhood center that we have, where the village once stood or continues to stand, that is that area that really has these features that really promote variability of uses, lots of low entry, so that way a local restaurant owner can get something started, or a small business can take their first shot. And comparing that with what we know to be the situation in sort of the large sort of super power centers, places like that. And so what we've done is try to keep it fairly modest. We don't actually move very far through the village, But if you have an area where you say there's enough interesting pieces here, that can be really valuable. The challenge with doing neighborhood walks in the suburbs is that the distances become so expanded, and that can be quite useful to be like, call it the local 5K. And because it's like, in order for us to see enough, sufficient uses or interesting details, we're going to have to walk quite a distance. That can be another interesting approach. Or even ask the question, let's do two walks. Which one is more interesting? And not just and to layer that as like an opening question, but then what we've talked about in our neighborhood walks is also which of these like areas are more productive, which of these areas are more conducive to people flourishing, which of these areas allow for people to live a car light lifestyle if they choose to, not being obliged to do so, but having the opportunity to do that. So
Norm, are the neighborhood walks that Del Pop hosts primarily attended by folks in Del Pop, or are they open to the public? And if they're open to the public, what are some ways that you kind of publicize that?
so far, the two that we've done have been just published on our email list, and we have publicized it on the Facebook page for like the broader Ladner community. But we have another one scheduled for this coming Thursday, or not this Thursday, but next Thursday. And that again, we're going to be trying to get the paper notified of it. We're going to be inviting a local city councilor to see if they can come along with us. We're still waiting on their response. And so sometimes it takes a bit of time. Ideally, another time we want to do it with like a local business owner or somebody from the Ladner Business Association, to be able to bring them in and ask them to be our guide, and simultaneously, kind of like what we was discussing with the media approach, is by going out with them and then stirring the conversation up in a certain way that can generate new opportunities for people to see their place. Another thing to do is a photo scavenger hunt. I know it sounds very high schoolish, but photo scavenger hunts can be a really cool opportunity, or like a 2-hour street photography session, and encourage people, if they have a camera or a smartphone, to actually just walk through a neighborhood, either in small little clusters with the intention of meeting up again, or go as a big group, or go as individuals, and take note of the things that people don't notice. And so one of our members, he took pictures of all of the places that were not being used as places, all of the side sort of corridors, the utility sort of spots that weren't really being used in a really effective way, in part because there was a lot of contention. Like the neighborhood was proposed for revitalization, and they had some good plans for how to do that, but people were really worried that like, there goes the neighborhood. And my whole comment was like, everywhere that people take pictures of currently for postcards, none of that is going to change. It has value. But the places that you would never think to take a picture of, that we've just taken pictures of, those are the places that we need to change. Those are the places that we need to convince the owners to do better within the community. That's where you can build wealth, is in the unloved, unused sort of limited spaces that are there. And so that idea of like a geocache series, or a photography scavenger hunt, that can be a really cool way. And it could lead to, if you have some good skilled photographers, you could do an exhibition at a coffee shop of, the things that people don't notice, or, beauty in unlikely places, whatever that looks like. And I know, John, you're a photographer, so that definitely touches on one of your passions as well.
I am a photographer. I'm also a new photographer. This is something that I started doing just at the beginning of COVID. And it was through photography that I realized just how little I had been noticing in my own neighborhood. And so I think that the idea of going out with a camera, I think that's a great idea, because it will help the familiar, like you'll see the familiar with fresh eyes. Like these things have been hiding in plain sight. Like you've probably been going past them, throughout your daily routine. And all of a sudden, when you're out there with a camera looking for something, it can be, you can see it with fresh eyes. I have this idea for a photo exhibit. Maybe this will be a National Gathering 2024. There's a photographer I like named Robert Adams, and he did a photography series, and it was eventually published in a book called 27 Roads. And it was like black and white photography of these 27 roads. And I want to do my own version called 27 Strodes. Fine art, black and white photography on the Strodes in my life. A camera can be a powerful tool for the Strong Towns Advocate.
And actually, this would be a suggestion if anyone is intending to host a neighborhood walk, is to add a layer of permanency by leaving behind like a laminated sheet that just has some description of it. So our plan is to basically zip tie a couple of our placards onto the post at like at a key place. So we have one street, Georgia Street, that has is a great example of different types of housing types. The missing middle housing types are all represented on that one street. And so to leave a placard that says, this street exemplifies the best of the missing middle sort of strategy of infilling neighborhoods with a diverse collection of different housing types. And look, there's no traffic, there's no conflict, there's no crazy, fights and brawls, and everything is just fine. This is what a mature neighborhood with mixed typologies of housing actually looks like. And to be able to provide that just on there really makes a difference. Now we have Jacob here. So welcome, Jacob. Thank you for joining us. I know that you had class run long, and so we're glad to have you here. Jacob, do you want to introduce yourself?
Hey, yeah, so I'm Jacob. I am one of the founders and organizers of the Charlotte Urbanists here in Charlotte. We do a lot of stuff, including neighborhood tours. So I've had some experience with this. So I'm happy to share what I've learned.
I'm curious, can you describe kind of what inspired you to start hosting these walking tours in Charlotte in the first place?
Well, so we call ours Jane's Walks. So they are inspired by Jane Jacobs and her idea. So that's where the inspiration came from. They started off very informal, just group of members, half a dozen of us maybe, just picking an area and just walking around and just literally just talking about what we see and observing the street as people, as Jane Jacobs would have us do. And then over time, they've developed to become a bit more formal, a bit more organized. So we do them every month on a consistent schedule. And we usually try to have someone who has local knowledge guide it. So we'll have a developer, a planner, just someone who knows a lot about the area to kind of guide it, which we found really adds to the overall quality because they can tell us the history and the future for these areas.
Who's participating in these? Not necessarily who's kind of facilitating or leading, but who's going on these walks? Are they folks primarily who are associated with the Charlotte Urbanist group? Are these open to the broader neighborhood?
Yeah, so what we've done with our group in general for all our events is we facilitate it through meetup.com. And what that's done is it actually has helped bring in just people who seem interested in it. So we usually have new people show up who we've never met before to almost all our events, almost every week. And some of them stay, some of them don't. But our Jane's Walks especially have really attracted a lot of just people who aren't otherwise urbanists, I would say, but they just like the tours. They just like the history of it and whatever, getting out of the house. They'll bring their families, whatever. So I would say we usually have a good core group of our actual, active members who go to most of these things. But we also have a sort of a constituency of people who are just sort of interested in just the Jane's Walks, who will actually show up monthly just for these, which has been really cool.
I'm trying to remember. I wrote an article about your group in November where I interviewed John Holmes, your co-leader, co-organizer. There's another thing that your group does, and I can't. It's not street. Oh, it's a public policy power hour,
yeah.
And you guys do it on the street. And there's between the public policy power hour and these Jane's Walks, something that I have come to really appreciate and admire about your group is how much you're actually on the street. You're in the neighborhood. Can you talk about just that as a kind of an overall philosophy for your group?
Yeah, so with the Jane Walks, I'm usually kind of the person in charge of that, and then John, my co-organizer, he does the policy hours because he's a policy major in school, so that's his thing. Yeah, we do focus on being very much on the street, like you said. Yeah, the Jane's Walks, I always try to make sure they're in a different area, so we're always kind of going around the city, different areas, and that's also helped us bring in different people. So not everyone may be able to make it to this side of town, but if we have one on another side of town, having them scattered about really helps with that. And also, I try to make sure that all our stops are accessible by public transit and stuff, so people can get to it if they don't own cars. And then as far as the policy hours, what John has done is really try to focus on Sometimes they're just like sort of in a public place just to talk about like a park or something, to talk about a topic. But other times, like recently, we talked about we did a policy hour on sort of immigrant communities and what they bring to the city and how we can support them. And so what he did was he found a local bakery shop owner who was an immigrant run and owned business and sort of had the meeting at his bakery. And we were able to kind of, see in person the kind of things we were talking about. And also we're able to get input from the bakery owner himself, who talked a bit about his perspective. So yeah, definitely being on location is very, very helpful.
Just a reminder, like we have at Strong Towns, what we call the 4-step process for public investment. And I'll just run through it real quick for folks. It's like step 1 is to humbly observe where the people around you are struggling. Step 2 is to identify the next smallest thing that can be done to address that challenge. Step 3 is to do that thing and to do it right now. And step 4 is to repeat. And it occurs to me that Jane's walks, neighborhood walks, like fit so well, maybe especially with step 1, to humbly observe. Is that like, would you say that that's true? How are like walking the neighborhood, like helping you see where people in your community are struggling and how those struggles might be addressed?
Yeah, we're a big fan of that formula. We've used it as a guiding principle for a lot of our stuff, whether it's our bus stop benches or whatever. It's kind of a big Strong Towns topic, but we see so much focus on mega projects and this sort of thing from the city. And it's like, great, but what are you doing for the people on the ground? So we really try to do that angle and do that first smallest step, and then just build and do what we can. And we don't have really any funding or anything like that, so we can't do these big projects, but we can do what we can. And it has a surprising impact. Just as a small example, one of our projects was the bus stop benches. Very small amount of money and time. We just sort of got on the ground and provided this amenity that was missing. And we now we're hearing from the city that they're doing a large amount of, and they're diverting a lot more funding now and putting a bigger emphasis on this problem. So it may be a small thing at first that you can do, but it really can multiply if you stick to it over time. And really, also being public about it helps a lot. Like getting local media coverage and that kind of really helps a lot. But if you can get the word out there with these kind of things, it really can make a bigger impact over the long run. And going back to the walks themselves, they're very easy to do. I mean, it helps if you know what you're talking about, and if you have someone who's an expert, or if you even just do a bit of research yourself on like the history of the area you're doing. Even if you don't, literally just showing up, scheduling a place and a time, and just being there, and doing it consistently has helped a lot with us too. Like every month, same time, same day. It makes a difference over time.
We wanted to ask you about the Benches for Buses project, because that's something that John and I had talked about back in November, but we were kind of curious to get an update from you on that project, because it is such a fantastic example of a small bet. I think you guys started with one bench. You wanted to see if people were using it and if it would be stolen, and people did use it. And I don't think that one was stolen. I think most of them have really benefited the community quite a bit. How many benches have you done so far?
Something in the neighborhood of 80. We've done it in 2 major phases with different rounds of public. We did like a GoFundMe to fund it. So we did that. We've done that twice now. And whenever I'm going around town, I see them used every day. Like don't even know how many thousands of people have used them. Probably right now someone's using one. It's just really crazy to think about how much impact they have. Just seeing those as I go by. We definitely learned lessons along the way, but we just, like you said, started very small. We started with just one bench. And actually, originally, even before that, we did folding chairs. We just started extremely small with like $10 and just literally just kept improving and iterating upon it with each version. And like I said, now it's starting to have an actual impact. And the city is, and the transit agency is really like funding this problem now. So it's actually had an impact.
I was just going to ask if there were resources that you've come across, Jacob, that you would recommend for people who are starting up neighborhood walks.
I would just say, like, get to know the local stakeholders. So in our case, a big helper was a guy named Clayton, who runs an Instagram account called CLT Development. So he's just very much like connected in with the local development community, and he knows the people. So just by knowing him, I was able to get a hold of different people who could lead these tours. And in other cases, I just reached out. I just emailed people I just, and it doesn't always work, but if you can just get some kind of connection with a person who's local to that specific area, it makes the world of difference in the quality of the tours.
What is it that you've learned that you maybe otherwise would not have learned because you've been doing this?
So a lot of it is very hyper local. So it's like learning a lot about this neighborhood or this street or this block or just that kind of local knowledge that can't be replicated outside of people who know the area. So a lot of it was actually learning the history of stuff of neighborhoods. Like we have a neighborhood, Brooklyn, that was a victim of urban renewal and was totally wiped out and is now parking lots, but used to be the center of the Black community in Charlotte. So just for example, stuff like that, just learning about that history and also the present conditions, but also the future of development and whatnot and city plans and that kind of stuff. Yeah, it's nothing, no big lessons, just a lot of really, really small ones.